Carolyn Holzman, and this is Confessions of an SEO. Usually I try to keep these weekly confessions to 15 minutes or less. Now, Season 6 is definitely more SEO-ish, so you're welcome. And this is Season 6, Episode 14 of Confessions of an SEO. Today's show is a response to a podcast that I listen to regularly. It's called Search Off the Record. Now, their topic was intended to be a helpful guide to parsing of HTML by browsers. And well, let's just say it would have perhaps been better had they stuck to that topic. It's where they diverged, where we begin today. Now, last week's Confessions, as I reflect, is where at the end of at least the JavaScript portion of my almost 5 years of indexation testing. The nature of indexation has expanded to include a lot more than Googlebot. So if you haven't listened to it, Google The Evolution of Indexing, Confessions of an SEO. I know I said this week we were going to talk more about how to know if the rejection of your content means if your site got hit with a penalty or if it was just economically rejected. Not that there's an emergency in SEO, but this sort of feels, at least to me, as close as one could get. Now, when one of the most trusted of voices in our industry really gets it wrong, maybe not explicitly wrong, but implicitly so. You know, have you ever listened to someone answer a question and realize they were giving you the exact technical truth while completely missing the point? This week I listened to the February 6th podcast in which Martin Splitt and Gary Elis were talking about parsing HTML, how browsers really parse HTML and what that means for SEO. Now, Gary and Martin are analysts on the Google search team. Now, I say that for those that don't or aren't in SEO, because I know most of us who are, we know who these guys are. But here's a sampling of the general topic. Quote, because technically HTML is supposed to be this beautiful structured thing, but in reality, it's just a mess because, well, it has to work all the time in browsers, which means that browsers are extremely lenient about what they accept, which in turn turns the developers extremely lenient in then they spit out random stuff. You got that? So basically, because browsers let you get away with it, designers try to get away with it. Basically, this is why graphic designers that they use semantic HTML, they need to understand that better. This is the code that sends the messages about what the topic is on the page but they put it in their navigation, right? Great, that's really helpful. So those high value communication points are saying things like services, about us, contact us, customers, and my personal favorite, blog. Or worse. I didn't think there could be something worse. This last week, I heard about a site in which the web designer created these beautifully visual headers gracing the entirety of every page across the site, only to find these were fake. There were no header tags in the code. It was just that the text was large and bold, sitting there proudly looking like a header, but completely silent when it came to explaining what that page was about to both, I guess, a search browser as well as an LLM. You know, web designers, like I said, definitely need to get a crash course in semantic HTML and what the heck it's supposed to be used for. You know, it's like musicians not understanding sharps and flats. Who does that? I digress. Most of the conversation on the podcast was about keeping your head section perfectly clean of visual elements, or you risk pushing your most important SEO signals into the body where Google will blind itself to them. Now, Okay, that was helpful, although if you're not fully versed on HTML, it did get a little weedy. And so maybe I saved you 30 minutes. You're welcome. And here's where things took that interesting turn that caused this to be today's topic. The conversation turned to semantic markup, things in addition to, schema, things like using H1s, these header tags, correctly, structuring your page, or whether valid HTML, like was your HTML accurate? The code that you put on your page, if it actually matters. And honestly, their answer kind of left me wondering, do they really not know where the industry is heading, or they know, but they're just talking like lawyers? Then the conversation turned to semantic markup, things like only using one HTML isn't really a thing, nor is structuring your page. I mean, why should you bother? And there was some question that they were, thinking about, that someone had asked them, and responding to the question from some person that was looking to them for advice, said that the question was, well, isn't it important to just only use one header tag, one H1 header tag on a page, and then you only do that once, and then you use H2s and 3s, et cetera, et cetera. And this was their answer. Basically, they said, nah, it's not really important. They joked that as long as a browser can figure it out and render it for the user, it doesn't matter if you have 5 H1s or if your code is a bit sloppy. Okay, granted, that may be technically accurate as far as a browser is concerned. But when I was listening to this, I actually had to stop what I was doing. And I thought to myself, what are they thinking? I'm sorry. I don't think this is arguing over minor details. Knowing what I'm seeing in terms of just how important these things are to all of the LLMs, artificial intelligence, these large language models. As I was listening to it, I almost heard that needle scratch down the LP record. I've been watching a lot of Ally McBeal. They just said it was okay to do whatever you want because browsers will sort it out okay, and implying that AI is perhaps, they didn't say this is the implication, that AI is going to take its cue from what? The legacy crawler? Now, here's a reality check. No one in our space, which is digital marketing, is just writing content so a browser can paint a pretty picture on a screen anymore. We are obviously writing to our customers, but we're writing for the purpose of getting our businesses and expertise cited by AI. Just to be clear, we're feeding information into those LLMs and the knowledge graphs. And, you can't sling a dead cat in LinkedIn without hitting some post telling people this is what we got to do. And here are two of the most trusted voices in digital marketing saying that because the browser will fix it, using haphazard semantic HTML headers like the ones, H1s, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just fine, however you use them. Don't worry about it. Bad HTML is A-okay. So why would they say that? How could they say that? And when you listen to what they said on the podcast, given who they are, I can only come up with two reasons. And I'm sorry to say, neither of them reflect well on the search team. One, they generally don't know. Maybe as spokespeople, they are so siloed into that classic indexer mindset approach. The 10 blue links and traditional Google bot rendering, that they generally aren't looking at what the AI pipelines actually need to make sense of a page. And that was all in last week's Confessions episodes. You're welcome. And then the other reason, and this is probably the more likely scenario, they know exactly what's going on, but they are answering like lawyers. Why open up a can of worms, right? Keep the answer simple. And they are answering a very narrow question about traditional crawling in browsers while completely ignoring, even downplaying, what our industry desperately needs to know right now. All of the testing we've been doing behind the scenes with VizX, I can tell you this, newsflash, an LLM does not have eyes. It doesn't care what font size your browser makes a random H1 tag. There's no connection between a browser's lenient, also known as sloppy, way to handle HTML. Those artificial intelligence pipelines do rely on structure. They rely on it to know what that section of the page is about. They require semantic clarity to extract what they need to know, the logic, and to understand the context. And if you just throw sloppy HTML at the wall because Google says, quote, it doesn't matter as long as the browser gets it ultimately right, unquote, you are foolishly diluting your signal from your site. If creators want to establish legitimacy and feed actual truth into the LLM ecosystem, we do not want to afford to be sloppy in our HTML. What we want actually requires us to kind of ignore that there's a safety net of a forgiving browser. And for what? Google spokespeople may be technically correct about an old school crawler renders a page, how it does that, but they are missing the forest for the trees when it comes to the future of AI citation. Structure matters, markup matters, and don't let the lawyer speak convince you otherwise. Or it's very simple, you will never get what you want. Now, I love these guys, but remember, they are in search. That's the legacy part of SEO, right? That's the optimize for your keyword kind of activity, which as far as I can tell, puts your content square in the middle of consensus noise. People don't let friends create haphazard HTML. The AIs don't like it, and you won't like it when you're paying an SEO team and not getting even into the average answer because your HTML made your page too expensive to compute. Oh, look, I did it. We did end up on my promised topic, the compute tax conversation. Oh, don't worry, I'll probably talk more about this. But I just felt an urgency to respond to what I heard on episode 106, and you should really listen to it. I'll put the links in. That's it for me this week. As you know, I'm VizX. This is what will help you create a topical vortex on your site, a clear signal. It's available now, WordPress or HubSpot, and in a few weeks we'll also be opening up another accelerator group. The difference isn't more content, it's connected content. Go to vizzex.ai. And while you're at it, check out Indexzilla. It's my indexer tool, and you can find it at indexzilla.io. And then I'd like to thank you for listening, and I will look forward to getting with you next week.